Everybody who's had a near-death experience is trying to describe something that's truly out of this world. So the way I like to imagine it, oh, that screen went blue. Imagine that's a black and white screen, all right? And our three-dimensional experience through time is actually being lived on that flat, two-dimensional black and white screen. A death is when we, whoever we are, right, our soul, our spirit, is separated from this physical body, this physical earth. So imagine when you die, you're ripped off that two-dimensional screen, and you're separated from it, and suddenly you're out in this three-dimensional room all around you, this world of three dimensions and colors that was all around you all the time, and you look back and you can see what Earth really was, this flat two-dimensional version, and now you're experiencing things that you've never experienced before, more real than that flat two-dimensional one, and then you get sent back. And imagine trying to describe colors to black and white people. Imagine trying to describe up and down to people who only know forward and back and side to side. And I'm convinced that's what people who have had near-death experiences are struggling with words for. But when you hear all the different ones and how they piece together, you start to see this grand picture of the life to come. And it's exhilarating. Now, I also believe that it ties to the framework that God's given us for thousands of years in the Bible. Now, the Bible, I believe, is as misconstrued as NDEs are. You know, the Bible is not one book. It's actually 66 books written over thousands of years by over 40 different prophets, claiming that the same God of light and love that NDEs experience has been revealing things all throughout history because he wants to be known, wants to be loved, but gives people free will, and so doesn't force us to love. And so with that in mind, those things in mind, let me talk through some of the commonalities that I've found in my studies. So the first is a new spiritual body. In the years, and I know many of you are, some of you aren't, but if you aren't, many experience, and the experiences like Mary said last night, Dr. Neal said last night, they're not all exactly the same, but they have a lot in common. And just like if you were put back in a two-dimensional world from a three-dimensional world trying to describe it, everybody interprets it in their own framework. But like Dr. Bruce Grayson, an NDE researcher, said, though the interpretations vary all around the world, the experience has a lot the same, a lot of commonalities. So one of the commonalities is people say when they die, they leave their body, but they still are themselves. In fact, they feel more themselves than they've ever been. And it's not just that they have 5 senses like we do here on earth, it's like they have 50 senses. And it's hard to describe even. But senses that have so much more life than we've ever experienced before. Marv Besteman, who was a retired bank president, said it this way. He talked about how he was wearing his normal everyday clothes. He sees people who are wearing their different garbs from all around the globe. And he said, my old geezer body felt young and strong and fantastic. The aches and pains and limitations of age were just gone. I felt like a teenager again, only better. And that's what many people say, And that's going to be great because I woke up with a bad backache this morning. It'll be great to be done with that, right? But actually, Paul, who wrote a good chunk of the New Testament, I believe, actually had a near-death experience. When he got stoned to death in Lystra, it's talked about in Acts chapter 14, stoned to death with rocks. I always have to make that clear. So, in Acts chapter 14, it says that this mob turns on him and stones him to death and drags him out of the city and leaves him for dead. And then he gets back up and goes back into the city. Personally, I wouldn't have gone back in the city, but that was Paul. But he writes later he's writing about himself in 2 Corinthians 12. In the Bible, he says this, I know a man, he's talking about himself. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know, God knows. Why didn't he know? was he felt like himself, and he had a body, spiritual body though. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I don't know, God knows, was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible things, things no one is permitted to tell. That's fascinating because people will come back, say they had all this knowledge of all the mysteries of life here on earth, but then they can't explain it exactly because it's veiled as they come back. Just like Paul is saying, things that here on earth we can't fully understand. And then Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5, he says, "For we know that when this earthly tent we live in is taken down, that is, when we die and leave this earthly body, we'll have a house in heaven, an eternal body made for us by God himself, not by human hands. We grow weary in our present bodies. We long to put on our heavenly bodies like new clothing. And we'd rather be away from these earthly bodies, for then we will be at home with the Lord." And this is what so many NDEs say, is that when I was there, I was just talking to a man who had an experience 6 years ago, and he said, I was home. And so many say that. It's like, that is where I belong. And they realize this. Now, interestingly, I've come up with a theory that people experience others, and we are ourselves. You can recognize yourself. You have a body just like our body. But I think also, the more I've studied, that we actually can appear in different ways. My personal theory is that we're about 29 in heaven. You know, prime age, right? Sound good? And, interestingly, on earth, 29 is the point at which our bodies start to decay, right? But we can appear to each other in whatever form that other person would feel comfortable in. And we wear clothing. We can have clothing on just like we do here. People say that. But also, interestingly, many people see people in these robes of white, these white robes, which I'll be honest, when I first started studying this, I was like, I don't want to wear a white robe forever. That's horrible. And it took me a long time to see that, it's not an either or. It's just like earth. You clothe yourselves in different ways at different times for different things. But here's what's fascinating about the white robe. Listen to what Dr. Eby, who fell 2 stories, cracked his skull open, then revives in the morgue, said. He said, "I was the same size, same shape as the person I'd seen in the mirror for years. I was clothed in a translucent flowing gown, pure white, but transparent to my gaze." That's interesting. "In amazement, I could see through my body and note the glorious white flowers behind me and beneath me. This seemed perfectly normal, yet thrillingly novel. My feet were easy to see, no bifocals needed. I instantly noted my eyes had unlimited range of vision. 10 inches or 10 miles, the focus was sharp and clear." Now, what people say, like Dr. Neal, who I've talked to, said this group of people, or beings spiritual beings she saw, were dressed in these white robes, but radiating this brilliant light, and the light was love, and the light was life coming out of these people. Now here's what's fascinating. Daniel, in 550 BCE, says this in Daniel 12:1-3. "Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever." Fascinating. God's been telling us about this all along. And what I've come to believe is that these robes of white are actually translucent, and they allow the life and love and light of God to shine through. And that we get to experience that. Can you imagine? The divine life and light and love that created everything. And we get to share in that. In the scripture it says, we will share in God's glory. We share in his sufferings. That going through this life has a purpose. And we're learning. And as we learn and allow God's light and his love to shine through us, maybe, in fact, that's how we enter, with the ability to shine. Now, here's the other thing that said about this. Jesus in Revelation 3 says, "They will walk with me dressed in white, for they are worthy. The one who is victorious or overcomes, like them will be dressed in white." And so this has been talked about all along. And it's interesting, John in the book of Revelation, we'll talk more about this, is taken up onto a high mountain and sees the city of God down below, far, far away, and yet he reads the names on the foundation that are written on the foundation. How in the world could he do that? I'm up on a high mountain. Well, because like NDEers say, there's vision is 10 miles, 10 inches, and perfectly clear. And so these bodies, just like Paul said, our bodies are buried in brokenness, Paul says, but they're raised in glory. They're buried in weakness, but they're raised in strength. They'll be buried natural human bodies, but they'll be raised as spiritual bodies. So the wisdom of this, I think, is to remember these bodies that we live in right now are not all there is to us. And they're slowly decaying, right? Anybody get that? Anybody ever feel that? And that's a sign. It's for a purpose. That we wouldn't think that this life is all there is to cling to. Now, we should live it fully in the moment, like Dr. Neal was saying last night. But not think this is all there is, so that we don't miss the very purpose that God has us here. The second commonality is earth-like beauty in new dimensions. And this is what's so amazing. NDEers commonly report this earth-like beauty of heaven. You know, grass, flowers, trees, mountains, streams, this glorious city. And yet it's experienced in other dimensions of time and space, like 2D to 3D, black and white to color. So commonly they say colors like you've never imagined before. Now why would that be? Well, because the light, that is light, that is love, is the light of God that shines through everything. And the light of God, you know, our sun is just temporary life support. Very limited spectrum. But the light of God has colors in the spectrum way beyond our sun. And that's why so many say, you know, there were colors there like you couldn't imagine. Everything like Earth, but so much more at the same time. Listen to how John, who was taken up to heaven, okay, and shown this, and he talks in the book of Revelation about what he saw. And listen to the beauty that maybe you never tuned into if you read this. John says, after this I looked in heaven, and people from every nation, tribe, people, and language were wearing white robes and holding palm branches in their hands. Now, don't miss that. You know, what God has been doing throughout the ages has been for all people of all languages and all nations. You know what's interesting, what gets misunderstood in the Bible? Do you know that the Bible, and I've studied the Holy Scriptures of most of the religions in the world, most don't talk about all the nations. The God who is revealing himself in the Bible talks about the nations, all the nations, and how everything is doing is for all the nations 500 times. And sometimes that gets missed. You know, interestingly, the Jewish people missed that and thought it was all about them and ended up crucifying Jesus, right? The Romans too. And Christians can do the same thing. And I know that's where, you know, some of you have at NDEs have had Christians say probably the most hurtful, hateful things sometimes. But just remember, same thing happened to Jesus. And don't let it cause you to throw out what God's been revealing just because some people miss the God of light and the God of love. So John goes on. So he says they were holding palm branches in their hands. Cool, palm trees in heaven. I love the tropics, right? So there are trees in heaven. He will lead them to springs of life-giving water. There's water, there's springs. He took me in the Spirit to a great high mountain. So there are mountains in heaven. He showed me the holy city. They're cities. It shone with the glory of God, the light of God, the glory of God. And then the angel showed me a river with the water of life, clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. Lamb refers to Jesus. It flowed down the center of a main street. They're streets. On each side of the street grew a tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit. They're trees, there's fruit. You know, Jesus said on his last night on earth, I go to prepare a place for you. And don't worry. I'm going to come and get you, and you will be with me, and we will eat, and we will drink. It's life. But life's so much more like this, but so much more than this. I want you to hear from a few people that I interviewed and see together how their stories aren't exactly the same, but they overlap. And I believe that they are seeing this city that John talked about. Now listen to how he talks about it in Revelation 21. He says, the angel carried me away in the spirit to this great high mountain, showed me the holy city, the New Jerusalem it's called. It shone with the glory of God. Its brilliance was like that of a very precious jewel, clear as crystal. That's interesting. So crystal, it's a crystal city, clear as crystal. It had a great high wall, 12 gates. The foundation of the city was decorated with all these precious stones. The wall was made of jasper. The city was pure gold, as clear as glass. Well, that doesn't make any sense to us, does it? And you know, I used to, and he goes on and he says each of these gates was made of a single pearl. And then it says the wall of the city had this foundation stone. It said the city does not need the sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light. I used to read this description, and I pictured like a cheesy, gaudy televangelist set. You know, gold streets and pearls, and it just sounded horrible to me. Until I started reading different NDEs and hearing what they said, and hearing from them, and realizing, no, this is just otherworldly. These are substances that are otherworldly. So listen to these three people. The first is Captain Dale Black, who's a TWA airline pilot. This guy has a PhD in aeronautical engineering, flew for commercial airlines for his whole life, have many multi-million-dollar businesses in aeronautics. No reason whatsoever to make up this crazy story. And yet I've seen the picture of his plane, small private plane that crashed into a monument in LA, and it was just a wreckage. Nobody survived. He came back. And then Don Piper, who's a pastor who you may know was run over by an 18-wheeler. And then Dr. Mary Neal, who you heard from last night. Well, listen how they talk about this. So in your book, you describe flying into, is it the New Jerusalem? What is it? And describe the beauty of what you saw.
I get this incredible airborne view, a descending, slowing down airborne view of the city of gold. And it's a city that's walled. Over the city were majestic mountains that were as gorgeous as any that could be ever seen. However, they did not look that different. I wasn't disappointed by them, I'm not saying that. I noticed snow. Think about that. Snow. What does that mean? Atmosphere? Temperature? Snow? What's that all about? I noticed flying birds later. What does that mean? These are the kind of questions I ask. Yeah. Okay, if a bird is to fly, it can't be a vacuum. I'm hearing music. What does that mean? Music can't transfer in a vacuum. It has to be in an atmosphere. There's atmosphere here in heaven. Oh, what does that mean?
And you're flying, but you don't have wings.
Right. I'm floating is what I would call it. I'm floating and coming and descending. And finally, I come down and touch ground level for a while, and I'm hovering between 40 feet-ish and down. But I recognize later, oh, there was gravity there. There is gravity. There is atmosphere. There's water. There are animals. Inside the city, I could see, we'll start from foreground to back. I could see the townships, as I call them, homes that people lived in, homes that were likely to be created for the people of heaven. Interestingly enough, they struck me by not so much the size as the architecture. I know nothing about architecture at all. I still don't. But I recognize that there's something divine about the architecture of the buildings. There were small, what we would call like condos here. There were single family residences that we would call here. There were huge palaces. And I could see that, but
and this is all inside the wall?
The other side of the wall. I saw another.
And how big is this city? I mean, can you tell?
I could not tell, other than it was beyond the horizon in both directions. There's countryside inside, so that it's gorgeous beautiful, all of the adjectives times 1,000.
So coming up to this dome structure, maybe, was it a city? Could you tell? Was there something inside? Was there an entrance into it?
There was an entrance. It was a big arched entrance and a wide threshold.
What did that look like, that entrance?
Well, similarly, it was almost like the old Roman block arches, but again, these blocks were seemingly solid looking, but not. They were really woven together with love, which is nonsensical. But
you
that's,
were aware of a structure?
yes,
Art.
it seems structural to me.
And was there the gate of heaven? Or
It wasn't, there wasn't a gate. It was just an archway.
Yeah.
And I would say again that if I had any inclination that I was coming back, I would have tried to make more mental notes, because many of the questions are the same questions that I ask myself now. And I will say that I was able to see many, again, people, angels, spirits, I'm not sure, were very busy. And I don't know what they were doing. Inside, they were all very busy. I don't know what they were doing, but they were doing something and clearly doing God's work.
Well, the gate is quite large. The gate itself, the entrance is small, and the wall is very thick, but you can actually see through it. So I'm looking over these people, and I can see through it, and there appears to be this massive boulevard that really kind of bisects the city, and it is made of gold. But gold that is so pure you can see through it. It's
What do you mean?
Well, you can actually see through the gold. It's gold and it's visible and tangible, but it is pure. Now we can't imagine that here because gold on earth is one of the densest metals we have. But in heaven it's so pure you can see through it. So you can see under it. You can see even the roots of trees and things like that. There are trees there. In fact, the tree of life is there. That we were not able to eat of here, we can eat of it there.
And you're looking through.
I'm looking at the tree. I'm looking at the gates. I'm looking through the gates. I'm looking down the street. There is a river that flows from this throne or this hill that's high and lifted up, and I know that's the river of life because we're told that it flows from the throne of God. So many of the things that we know and enjoy and love here are visible there as well. I would say this, heaven's never going to be less than this. It's always going to be more. So whatever you imagine here that is meaningful to you, the relationships, the beauty, and let's face it, there's some glorious places on earth, but there should be because God created it. This is His place. So heaven's not going to be less than that. It's going to be more than that. There are structures on both sides of the city. They look like mansions to me. I mean, they're glorious places for people to dwell. So it's just an incredibly awesome, overwhelming, bustling place. It's not a boring place. There aren't any cherubs sitting around in clouds playing harps. This is an active, exciting, thrilling place. And
Yeah, okay. So, hold on, go away. All right. That's not distracting. No. Stop. There we go. So, think about that. The wisdom of it is to realize that God has prepared a place for us, home. He's been telling us about it all along because it's where He wants us all to be. It's what He created us for. This place of love and life, and it's life. It's life like you love it on earth. I'm convinced every good thing we love about earth is only because it's what God created. And it's only more in the life to come. But this life to come, don't miss, is all about relationship. And NDEers commonly say this. They come back knowing that love is the most important thing. It's the most important thing to God, but it's supposed to be the most important thing to us. And there's this relational reunion often, right? There's this welcoming committee of people, often that NDEers recognize, who have gone on before them. And they say, interestingly, many of them, that they were there to welcome me and guide me and protect me. It's interesting. Many of them say that. They don't know what from, but to welcome and guide and protect. And Jesus told us about this as well. He said in Luke 16:9, it's recorded, he said, use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. That welcoming committee. You know, and Jesus taught us that God is love, and love is the point of the whole thing. He said that to love God first is the first and most important thing. And the second, he said, is just like it. You can't take the two apart. To love your neighbor as much as you do yourself. He said that sums up all the commands of the Bible. So this life to come is all about relationship. You know, Kathy and I used to have this debate about, gosh, heaven's going to be terrible because we're not going to be together. And I was like, whatever gave you that idea? No, heaven is meant for relationship. And the relationships we form here are continuous. Doesn't mean we won't make new ones, but they don't go away. They resolve with new understanding, because of course communication is pure. Understanding, like Mary said last night, is pure. But there's something wrong here, isn't there? Because we want to love. We really do. I mean, I'm a pastor. I try to help people love each other. Oh my gosh, is it difficult. And it's hard for me. I mean, all of us struggle. And we, the person we love the most, we end up dividing and divorcing, and there ends up being wars and gossip and hurt and hatred. And you're like, why? When we all want to love. Well, I think because the God of love allows us to either accept and follow his will or choose our own will. And this is really, really important. So another commonality is that people see this God of light and love all over the globe. It's consistent. And in the presence of this being of light, where they feel more love than they've ever felt, and this is not a force, this is a person with a personality. Commonly say this. Knows them better than they know themselves, yet they've never felt so loved. They've never felt so cared for. And in this being's presence, they know two things. They know that God is love, and they know that love is what matters to him most. That usually comes through in the life review. Now, I believe that this God of light and love has not just started revealing himself in the 20th century, but has wanted to be known and loved all along. And yet, love requires free will. You ever thought about that? Like, you ever loved someone who didn't return your love? You ever had a child that you loved and you wanted good for them, but they rejected your will for their lives? We've all experienced it, right? And you can't force love. You can put a gun to someone's head and say, tell me you love me. And they might, but do they really love you? No, you can't force love. And God can't force love either. He created us and chose to limit himself by giving us free will. And so I believe that's part of what we are here learning, is why God of love and light and his will is better than just going our own way and doing our own will. But this is an important thing to understand too. We're going to gain wisdom from near-death experiences, because like you heard Howard say last night, they're not all good. And in fact, Howard started good, and he felt better than he ever felt before, and he had this welcoming committee there who wanted to lead him. He thought to get surgery, but it didn't turn out that way. And 23% of those who come forward, and people are hesitant to come forward and talk about their near-death experiences, and even more hesitant if it was a hellish one. But 23% of those who come forward had hellish ones. So if we're going to have wisdom, we've got to make sense of all of it, right? Now, I think just like Howard said last night, God doesn't want anybody to go to hell. Hell is the only place for people who truly don't want God to rule. And he gives them what they want. He lets them play God. He lets them rule. My will be done. And so hell is a place apart from the light and love of God where created creatures try to be God to everybody. And that's what's wrong with this world. And it's what's wrong with me. I, most days, seek my will be done more than God's will be done. Now, here's the thing. God doesn't want us to fear that. I'm convinced. And this God of light and love has been revealing himself throughout the centuries, the millennia. So think about it. 2000 BC, all right? About the time, the beginning of recorded history, God says he chooses Abraham and Sarah, this couple, to create a nation. And he says, I'm going to create a nation from you. And the purpose of this nation, he said, in Genesis chapter 12, he said, I'm going to bless you, and through you, all nations on earth will be blessed. That's why he did it. And he created the Jewish nation through Abraham and Sarah to preserve his words and what he was going to do, claiming that one day he would actually enter human history in a form, a two-dimensional form we could relate to. So that's what he was claiming to do and foretelling all along. Think about it then, 1500 BC, this God of light and love appears to Moses, and Moses says it's like a burning bush, but this brilliant light that wouldn't go out and didn't burn up the bush. Right? And then that God rescues them from slavery and says, here's what I want. First and foremost, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. That was the creed. And then all the 10 Commandments are about how to love one another. Don't kill each other. Don't steal from each other. Don't take each other's husbands or wives, right? It's all about love. And then you see through the prophets, this continues on. Isaiah, in Isaiah 53, foretells when God will enter into our suffering. He says that light will come to Galilee. Tells a specific place. By the way, we know this wasn't written after the fact because we found a complete copy of the book of Isaiah in the Dead Sea Scrolls predating Jesus. So God has done this because he wants us to know him. He wants us to love him. He wants us to trust him. And in Isaiah 53, he said, this Messiah to come will not only be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Prince of Peace, but then will take on our suffering, our wrongs, our sins, and die. This is Isaiah 53. Go read it. But then we'll see the light of life. He foretold the first Easter. And he did that because he said he's paying for all our wrongs so that we don't have to. And we don't have to fear. And we don't have to fear God's condemnation. He doesn't stand ready to condemn us. This is what NDEs commonly say. In fact, they have this, one more thing I just want to point out is Daniel then, in 400 BC, sees this man of brilliant light. His body looked like a precious gem. His face flashed like lightning. His eyes flamed like torches. His voice roared like a multitude of people. And I document in Imagine Heaven how people all around the globe, in the Middle East and Singapore, all over, see and hear the same person. And then Ezekiel sees this vision of heaven, and he says, I see on the throne was a figure like that of a man. I saw that from what appeared his waist up looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, this brilliant light surrounded him. Paul is, in the New Testament, persecuting Christians because he thinks Jesus is a sham and it's blasphemy. And on the Damascus road, this blinding light stops him and says, Saul, that was his original name, Saul, why are you persecuting me? He says, who are you, Lord? The voice replied, I'm Jesus, the one you're persecuting. And then Saul ends up becoming Paul, who writes a good chunk of the New Testament, talking about this God of light and love. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever believes or trusts in me, like Mary was saying last night, will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And here's the thing in this life review, which is the other commonality that happens all around the globe. In fact, Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch researcher, says this: the life review is usually experienced in the presence of a being of light. During this panoramic life review, people experience not just their every action or word, but also every thought from their past life, and they experience the effects of their thoughts, words, and actions on other people. And the point they get is that how we treat each other really matters to this God of love. And that our actions, for better or for worse, have a ripple effect through humanity. And that he wants us to see that every little act of kindness counts and matters. And that ultimately that is our purpose. That, whatever else our purpose is, we all have a purpose here, and it's unique. This is such a cool thing. Have you ever thought about it, that your thumbprint is like no other? Even if you're a twin, there is no one else exactly like you. And God created you, every human, it says, in his image. So it's only in the diversity of humanity that we see the full image of God. But you were created for a unique relationship with God. A unique, loving relationship that no one else could have. And as Howard and Mary have said, in his presence you feel like you're the only one. The special one. Why? Well, that's how I feel about both my kids. But I'm finite. I'm limited. He's not. And so in this life review, what we see is exactly what Jesus said. He said, there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. And it says in 1 Corinthians 4:5, judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait until the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in the darkness, and will expose the motives of the heart. At that time, each will receive their praise from God. Now that's really important. They will receive their praise from God. And here's what's, I think, wisdom in all of this. The life review is reminding us that our actions really do matter. But he wants to reward us. He wants to praise us. That's what I think he's trying to teach people. See, heaven is not, I believe, based on how good we are or whether we can work hard enough to get here or get there. See, the problem with that's religion. And where's the line? That causes fear. And yet, Jesus said in John 3:16, he said, God didn't send his son into the world to condemn the world, to judge the world or condemn the world, but to save it, to set us right with God. And that's right where he said, that God so loved the world, he sent his one and only Son, that whoever would believe in him, or just trust, would have everlasting life. Now why? Why believe? Why trust? Well, when Kathy and I stood at the altar, it wasn't the ring that made us married, was it? It wasn't the pastor sprinkling pastor dust on us that made us married. It was a faith pledge. It was an I do from the heart. That's all God wants from us. Is will we, in love, turn back to him and say, I do, to his proposal. And I believe that's what we're here to learn. This world does not go according to God's will and ways all the time. It's somewhere in between a picture of heaven and a picture of hell. We experience love, we experience joy and beauty and relationship and excitement and all these wonderful gifts, but we also experience people going their own way and doing their will and trying to manipulate and control and dominate one another and get everyone to do my will. My will be done, God. Right? Why aren't you doing what I know you're supposed to do? Well, that makes me God. And that's, I believe, the problem with humanity. We all have an addiction to playing God. But just like the recovery movement discovered, all we have to do is realize, I need God to overcome this. And he says he is ready and willing, not only to forgive us, because he's already paid for it all, but he wants to set us free from any fear of condemnation or judgment so that we don't even judge ourselves, and we don't judge others, and instead we walk with this God of light and love to spread his light and love throughout the earth. That, I believe, is the wisdom of near-death experiences, combined with what I've seen revealed in the Bible. And